we're definitely talking about continuing like a hybrid Zoom and in person once the pandemic is under control. Once it
Right.
becomes endemic rather than a pandemic. So we're talking about making it available. So we'd have like a TV and keyboard and camera and all that.
Looks like you're live streaming.
Yep, just got it going. I finally hit the right button. So let's give it a few more minutes. We have another 5 minutes before we're supposed to start. So just wait for the stragglers to come in. Let's see who's here so far.
Does this look familiar, Steve?
Yep.
Fits in my pocket.
Wow, look how tiny it is.
Beautiful. 300 baud.
Did you actually work on that, Steve?
No, I don't think so. How many gigabits is it?
You get 450 baud on the Commodore modem.
Yeah, I used to be able to push this to about 350. Yeah.
The great thing about that speed was that you could actually read it while it was coming in.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I remember. You see the text going across the screen.
Yeah. But if you wanted to download anything, it would take days.
Wasn't it 13 hours per megabyte?
Yeah, quick calculation on that. It was a 300 baud would be about 30 characters per second. 333,000 seconds. 555 hours. 23 days.
Oh, 23 days.
Yeah. 23 days per megabyte.
Wow. Simon, I've just made you co-host, so if anything goes wrong with my connection, you're my backup. We're definitely talking. Oops.
Ooh, somebody else.
Oh, just my audio. I'm just trying to monitor the stream as well.
The Walter.
Alalia? Yep.
Yeah.
I just saw him.
I see his computer.
I'm just playing with a modem, like a little Wi-Fi modem with the C64.
Very cool. Is that an atom bomb I just saw?
Yeah, that's a Coleco atom behind it, and then a PET behind that.
Love the old sound of that typewriter.
Oh yeah, the hammering daisy wheel. Yeah. Actually, I eliminated it with a. I don't know if you can see the power pack on top of the atom.
Okay, right on.
Yeah, right over there. So I got rid of the printer. I mean, I still have the printer because it's neat, but I don't need to use it anymore, which is cool.
Got rid of the atom killer.
Yeah.
Fair enough, of course. Fair enough.
Got Jim Butterfield to come back from the dead? Now that would be something.
That would be cool. I totally get him to sign one of my books.
Oh, one person would be nice if he came back from the dead was what was his name again? The one that used to run the computer museum in Brantford.
Yes.
Oh, Simon Sid. Sid Bolton.
Sid Bolton. Yeah. But that museum's not coming back. Apparently, nobody wanted to continue it. So.
Well, didn't U of T take the collection?
I don't know.
Collection or something? There was something about that recently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Leaf
exactly.
posted something.
Still have us worldwide, but I still found it to be a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
Celevi, of course.
I mean, there are some really great computer museums in California. A friend of mine sent pictures. But that was still nice to have around here.
Yep.
Yes. Definitely was a fun meeting place just to hang out even.
Yeah.
Hey, my name was on the wall.
And so it should be.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going through some of the settings in NovaTerm and I saw the punter setting and I'm like, oh, hey, that guy's coming to TPUG.
By the way, that little blurb on it in Wikipedia has nothing to do with me. Somebody else put it up there. I don't think it says very much.
Still, it was a handy feature back in the day to be able to message between bulletin boards.
Yeah, if you didn't mind it not being instant.
No, no, but
that wouldn't fly today.
No.
3 minutes, 3 seconds. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Get the lead out.
I still remember one company I worked for. We had an office in Mexico, and we were using the U program to do email, and not even hourly. It was a daily dump.
Was he cutting out for anybody else but me?
Yeah, he was cutting out here too.
Yeah, can you repeat what you said? What were they? What was going on in Mexico?
Me? Oh, we were doing the Unix to Unix copy program, and email was being dumped nightly. Not even hourly. It was nightly.
Wow.
But it was still amazing. The idea that you could get a message from somebody
the next day. Yeah.
The next day. I mean,
exactly. Or the ham radio guys literally bouncing signals off the moon to get it to the other side of the world. Not quite real time, but still, it worked.
Yeah.
Steve, can you tell us about how it came about? Because I know we had a lot of interest about the Punter protocol here.
Well, to be quite honest, there was other protocols around at the time. I mean, the big one was X modem. And the problem with including it in software back in those days is that there was no easy way to do it. So I figured, I'll just write one from the ground up. Probably wasn't the best idea, but it still worked out rather well. I copied the basic idea of X modem, which was pretty simple anyway. It was simply a matter of sending a certain amount of bytes with a checksum, having the receiving computer check the checksum and then send back a result and say whether it was okay or it wasn't okay. And if it was not okay, you'd send the data again. But this would guarantee that it eventually got there in one piece. The problem with it, of course, was if you were trying to do this over great distances, back in those days, it wasn't uncommon for telephone systems to use satellites to send their calls around the world. So say, for example, you were talking to someone in Australia, then geosynchronous satellites, people tend to forget just how high up they are. They're about 50,000 miles above the Earth. So a round trip bounce off of that satellite is 100,000 miles. And if you have to do that bounce twice, that's about 200,000 miles. And you say, well, it's not that very far. But you remember that light travels at 186,000 miles per second. So that would be a latency of about a second.
Right.
Yeah, and so if you did that for every little 256 bytes of data you were sending, that adds up, right? Because first of all, the ping times are not just the distance to the other end, it's the distance back from the other end. So you could have latencies of up to 2 seconds. And if you had 2 seconds for every little block of data you were sending, that could double or triple the amount of time it takes to send it. And that was kind of unacceptable. That's actually what Z modem was all about. Z modem was a streaming protocol which did not wait for acknowledgments of each packet of data that was sent, so that it would simply send the code saying, hey, this block was bad, please resend that. It would simply send it back, and the receiving end would pick it up whenever they could, and then they would resend that block. And because the blocks were all numbered, they could send them in any order and reconstruct them at the other end. But it got rid of the latency between packets. and that saved a lot of time. I wrote a protocol that did that, but it was only ever written for my BBS, although some people did try to take it outside of that. It was called C2, and it was basically a streaming protocol, just used different principle from Z modem, but it worked okay. I just never really perfected it, and I never put it out into the public. So that's protocols.
That's cool. How far was the protocol? Do you think? Like, were the nodes worldwide or something, or? I remember NANET and whatever for North America and FidoNet, but
my network was never very big. It was at most maybe a couple hundred computers, so it was a non-existent thing really, because FidoNet and those larger networks, even back in those days, they were thousands of computers.
Right.
I don't kid myself. It was small potatoes.
No, it's pretty fundamental to me. I loved it. It was so much cool.
Oh, it was fun. It was fun, okay. I mean, it was the only way to do it, right? I mean, yeah, you could. Eventually, I did put X modem and Z modem into my BBS. Probably, maybe a bit too late, but it was just for people who had terminal programs that would work with those protocols. And as for them being more reliable, it wasn't so much that they weren't as well designed, but a lot of times the version of the code that was running wasn't as reliable, and they came off looking rather poor anyway, even though they were well designed. Was
it difficult to bring those libraries into your BBS program at all? They reasonably well documented? Did they even give you an API?
I didn't do it with source code. For the most part, you had these. I don't think they were terminate and stay resident device sort of things, but they were separate pieces of code that were called by my program, and then they did the work.
Okay.
Ooh, I have somebody else here.
Yeah, we got a message in chat from Andrew Bradley about so nice to see so many people here.
Yeah. How many do you show? I only show 4 people on video, including myself.
We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10,
21 people.
21 people right now.
Yeah,
so most of them are
participants.
Just yeah, they're just listening.
Yeah.
Lurkers.
It's often nice to be kind to bandwidth to have the video off, especially when we're recording, so that it doesn't potentially get choppy.
Yeah, I just don't want to crack any lenses, hence I'm keeping my camera off.
Yeah, because it's not really necessary.
Zoom
Since I'm supposed to be the guest speaker, I keep mine on.
Oh, wow. So we've got David Bradley on, and we've got Jim Oldfield. A lot of old timers here. No offense intended, of course, but very cool.
There's a full contingent of Bradley brothers.
Awesome. So, Steve, how about the BBS program? How did that come about?
Actually, that started a lot longer ago than the protocols. I think it was one day I was down at, what were they called again? They were down on...
batteries included?
No, not batteries included. They were near, I think they were Marketron. They were up near Bay and Bloor. Actually, 1 street north.
Yeah.
Was it Marketron?
Can't remember the name, but I know the one you're talking about.
Anyway, I was there, and they had this crude BBS that connected, using a dial-up acoustic modem, where you used to have to take the phone and put it on the modem in order for it to work, because we didn't direct connect to Bell Canada back then. So, I thought that was really cool. So I thought maybe I could write something of my own. But the first thing I needed to do was come up with a way of having the device auto-answer the phone, because the modems back then didn't do that either. So I designed a simple little circuit that would detect a ring, and if it detected one, it would close a relay, and then that relay would stay closed until it was instructed to disconnect. So basically, the phone was left sitting on the cradle of the modem so that it could hear it. Mind you, the one drawback to that, and I think everybody who ever used one of these kinds of modems and old-fashioned telephones would know, is that old-fashioned telephones used carbon microphones, which used compressed carbon particles. Then as you talked, the particles would be compressed and uncompressed, and that would change the resistance, and thus they would get an audio signal. But after being exposed to a constant tone, which the modems produced, would eventually start to compress and stay that way. And the phone microphone would become unsensitive. So, quite literally, you had to take your phone and bang it on a table a few times to loosen the particles. And then it would go back to working the way it used to. You may have to do that once a week or so, depending on how bad your microphone was. So anyway, once I built the answering circuit, then it came time, let's write some software. And obviously it wasn't very complicated to begin with. Just needed it to store messages, display them to callers. But it was still fun. It was like, hey, I got my own system that people can call into and I can talk to them. And I guess from there it just sort of grew. I just thought, well, let's do some more stuff with it. I don't think the whole idea of a networking the BBSs came about for at least another couple of years. And I was sort of modeling that on the existing FidoNet and networks of that nature. And again, it was just done really just for fun, to see if I could do it. And I did actually make a little bit of money selling BBS software, but it was never a living.
Was this all done on the 64? Or?
Yeah, I forgot. What platform was it available for?
No, the very first one would be a Commodore PET. Because this was 1981, and we didn't have a Commodore 64 just yet. I did eventually shift it over to the Commodore 64, and that was all sorts of headaches in itself. For example, the serial port on the 64 was unstable. And while it worked fine at 300 baud, it was terribly unstable at 1200, and it would drift. So I had to build in like compensation for the speed to make sure that the modem and the computer worked at the correct speed, because we couldn't trust the chipset in the 64 to be stable enough at that speed. So that was fun.
What was the fastest you could do on a PET?
I don't think I ever took the PET any faster than 300. I think by the time I switched over to the 64, we were still using 300 baud. And so when the faster 1200s and 2400s came out, that was when I was using the 64. I don't know if the PET would have been able to handle it, though, because the 64 still had a faster processor than the Commodore PET did. So actually, the 128 was a better machine to use. Even in Commodore 64 mode, it was still better hardware. So it was more stable.
So back in the days when you ran the TPUG BBS, did it run off the 64s?
Let me see. I think the early ones, I think the TPUG BBS, by the time that came around, that was a PC.
Oh, okay. That was a little later.
Is my voice still on?
Yep.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Steve, this is Jim Oldfield from Champaign, Illinois.
Yes, I remember your name.
I remember you very well, sir. We used to do, you remember back in the early 80s that we did the Starship MPC, BBS, the Punter BBS there.
Yep, I remember that one.
You helped us get it onto a Zytec hard drive.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff back on the PET days.
Hard drives were fun back then.
Oh, they were interesting.
You remember the Commodore hard drives?
Backups.
Do you remember the Commodore hard drives?
I sure do.
Yeah, they had two sizes. There was 5 megabytes and 7.5 megabytes, which is ridiculous because, most files are bigger than that.
Yeah, 9016 and 9090, if I recall.
Yeah, and they were huge. They were like, they weighed a ton because they had power supplies built into them.
Oh my gosh, they were boat anchors.
Yes, and what did they sell for originally? $5,000.
Oh my gosh, they were like $599.
Yeah,
the single and something like $11.99 for the double.
Yeah, so put that in today's money, and what we were paying, $20,000 for a 5 megabyte hard drive?
Well, it was like buying a new car back then. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, I was going to ask, you haven't mentioned, you worked with, remember Proline Software, you and Butterfield and Templeton, you guys had your stuff.
Well, those guys did stuff for us. They weren't actually part of the operation. It was me and a guy named Stuart Martin.
Yeah, I remember Stuart.
Yeah, he passed away about 10 years ago.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah. Before he passed away,
he was a good guy.
He moved up north, and he was actually in local politics up there.
Yeah, I knew he was before you guys got with him, with Proline and that.
Yeah.
But BBS was very interesting. We learned a lot from your software and stuff. Art Kimball and I used to dissect all of your you kept everything in BASIC, which we thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, there were little bits and pieces
bars.
of it that were in machine language or something like that, just to keep it fast. Especially when I moved it to PC.
The good stuff.
Yeah, but it was mostly in BASIC because that was the easiest thing to program on. I mean, yeah, I've been doing work with assembler because that's WordPro was written for assembler, and I remember that I actually wrote my own assembler to start before Commodore brought out their official one.
Yes.
And then I shifted over to that.
Yeah, but remember we used to have all the craziness on the BBS, your system, because it was one call goes in and you can log into your BBS. We used to do, remember, I think some of the guys from TPUG also we stuck in some random messages that came out of the BBS that came from like Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. They'd come through on a message to you while you were on our BBS. So people picked up on that stuff. Through the software, through the routines into your Punter net. But we had a blast with it over the years. It's still actually up. It's not with Punter software any longer. It's on the internet, but it's still Starship MPC.
Yeah, I know a lot of people shifted the old BBSs onto the internet because you can't use modems anymore.
Yeah. I was telling some friends of ours just the other day, you would remember this as well, is that some of your protocols and that we worked with TTY with 110 baud.
Yeah. Well, that's slow.
You can type that fast.
Yeah, probably type faster.
But it is great to see you alive and well and doing well.
Yeah, I'm still around.
What are you doing?
I'm actually working. You see Jay Winnick there?
I'm sorry?
DJ Winnick there? He's on one of our videos waving.
Working
with him, we're doing a little startup, which we tried all sorts of things over the last few years. We settled upon a game for Android and iPhone, which is based on, well, maybe I should let Jay describe it, but basically it's the idea is his project. Go ahead, Jay.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Great to see some faces I haven't seen in God knows how long. Like,
I'm afraid to know.
It would have been, let's see, 84, 85. Remember then?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I've known Steve like a long time. I actually wrote a BBS that looked like his for the 64 because at the time he said you can't run it on a 64, and I wanted a BBS, so I had to write my own. So Steve and I have been. How many years have we been working on it? It feels like it's longer than the BBS.
Yeah, it probably is too, because I'm guessing it's at least 5 years.
Yeah, 27 years. Didn't we start in the summer of 2015?
Yeah, probably. So yeah, so 6.5 years.
They didn't have any word like, I had never heard the word startup until like the modern era. You just did stuff, right? You didn't you just started a business. There was no thing as a startup. So yeah, we've been developing it kind of started out originally as a scavenger hunt, but it's evolved into a game where you get given clues and then you have to draw the thing to win. And so it's been what were we on probably about the seventh design, the third the pivot of ideas, and three different platforms for development. So it's been a crazy ride. Yeah, and it's changing names again.
Yeah, it's much harder to make it in the real world than you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I kept all of my hardware I got my first pet in late '77, and I still have all my pets in my different pieces of hardware over all those years. I kept all this stuff. It's just crazy. It's great to see that a lot of this stuff is coming back, and like I never realized when I bought my first pet that it'd end up in a museum. I just never thought of that one.
Well, I guess you tended to think of that kind of equipment like any other piece of equipment. It would come and it would go and it would be replaced, and then everybody would forget about it.
Yeah.
Like your
I thought
hairdryer.
that too. You're right, Steve. Most people do.
Yeah, but I think the computers were something completely different, and they deserved a place in history. And obviously, they have their place in history now. And I understand why some people still like the 8-bit computers, because they're simple and you can actually wrap your head around what they do. I was at a World of Commodore show 10 years ago, and somebody there had started the project to reverse engineer the 6502 processor, the one that was in the pet. They did it by literally carefully grinding down the chip and looking under a microscope to see what was there, and they literally rebuilt it. There was only 3,500 transistors in a 6502, so it was doable.
Yeah.
These days, a typical, chip, say for a graphics card, could have 2 to 3 billion transistors in it. So you're not going to be scraping that down and looking under an electron microscope hoping to figure out how it works. Yeah. But anyway, they figured it all out. And not only that, they actually had a web page you could go to where you could, type in a couple of instructions to try something, and it would then show you graphically all the wires inside the chip that were going and what they were doing to produce the result. But I mean, to be able to wrap your head around that is something you can do, something a single human being can do. Computers these days, you cannot know everything about every detail about every chip and every computer. It's simply not possible. So
I have two sons that are I got two sons that are computer science degrees, and between the two of them, they still don't know everything.
I'm pretty sure they never will.
No. Hey, Steve, I was going to mention to you a little tidbit with your Punter BBS. Do you remember that we used to send the packets after midnight?
Yeah, because it was cheaper on the phone rates.
We used to hook up all the BBSs around the country.
Yeah, because we used to have to do it through long distance phone calls.
Yeah, we were internet before those internet, Steve.
Yeah, and I don't think people these days understand just how damned expensive long distance used to be.
Well, if you recall, we used to have. Remember, Butterfield taught us about how the telephone companies, they do their area codes based on the population. So that when you have a small population next to a larger one, they tend to overlap it a bit so that they can get more money for their services than they would if it was just rural. And so Butterfield had done a thing about how they do the different area codes. And you and some of the others, and we figured out how to use the packet after a certain time, say between midnight and 3 a.m, which is the cheapest telephone calls you could do. Zip them all across, some messages across the country, and that's how we all talk to each other.
Yeah, well, obviously your phone rates varied by your phone company and who you had, and up here in Canada we had Bell Canada, and that was it. And as much as I really don't like Bell Canada as a company anymore, back then I got to say that they were sometimes very nice about things. One time I had a modem that stayed connected for 8 hours to somebody in the US, and I forget what that would have worked out costing, but it was quite a bit. I phoned them up and I said, I told them exactly what had happened, and they said, well, did you intend to have it kick? I said, no, it wasn't intended. There was nothing sent. And they credited me the whole call.
Wow.
That's about the last nice thing they ever did.
I was going to say that's an awful, that's very rare.
It is.
I had also here in the US when I was in Illinois that we had to be careful with our modem because back then they did surcharges on data sending back and forth. It was like regular fee, but if we hooked a computer to it, they doubled the rates.
Really?
So we would start talking first, then we would say, okay, in 15 seconds, put your phone in your modem, the one that, with the cups.
Okay, because they only listen to the first few seconds.
Put them in there and we could talk, and they wouldn't charge us for data, but they caught us. And I had a couple of surcharges for doing that here.
Don't forget, they had area codes. There were certain parts of area codes that you could call into other area codes, and it was free.
Right. Absolutely.
So I could call Mississauga, but Mississauga couldn't call like Whitby. So you could only go so far in a local area code. It was kind of.
You know, one of the weirdest things is if you lived in Georgetown, which is just to the northwest of Mississauga, literally it touches it, right? You could not call Georgetown from Mississauga without incurring long distance. But you could call Georgetown free of charge from Scarborough, which is way on the other side of Toronto.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of dumb thing.
Jay's right. That's how we did that. Like, for example, I was in Decatur, Illinois. If I called Champaign 50 miles away, they would get a surcharge, a long distance charge. But if I called, say, a little town called Tuscola, and then they called Champaign, they wouldn't get charged long distance. So when we did the BBSs, whenever we send messages, we time it, whatever time it was supposed to be, and we go from Decatur to Tuscola to Champaign, but Champaign could go to Paxton, and Paxton would go to Normal, and Normal would hit Chicago, and there'd be no surcharges all the way up to Illinois State. All because of Steve. He did that.
Yeah, that's my fault.
Then
another thing I used to do to help, get around long distance charges was, for example, my cell phone way back in the 90s was in Toronto, right? So they didn't charge for call forwarding. Like if I call forwarded through the phone, as long as it was just direct call forwarding, then there was no minute charge for that. So if I needed to call somewhere that was long distance from where I was, but not long distance from Toronto, then I could forward my cell phone to the number I wanted to call, phone my cell phone number, have it forwarded to that number, and I wouldn't be charged long distance, nor airtime. So that worked out well.
That's spy stuff, Steve. That's spy stuff there.
That's low-level hacking, really.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like I said, the Punter software, like I said, you had your routines to use for the talking and I/O and that, but we had a blast with your basic. It wasn't spaghetti. It was good code. It wasn't spaghetti code, as I say.
Yeah, but it's kind of hard to call basic not spaghetti code.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it was linear code. You had to have go-tos all over the place, and go-tos are nasty.
Yeah.
But they were the staple of languages like BASIC because it really had no way to structure.
Yeah.
There was no structure.
Yeah, one of the things I think people forget that when you did WordPro, that was a big deal back in Commodore days because that was the first professionally done word processor, which set everything up for everything else.
Yeah, that was funny how that started too. It was just one of these things.
How did that start with WordPro?
I wanted, where I was working at the time had a Wang word processor. And I found out that it actually worked on a 6502 processor. So I thought, well, hey, if this machine can do word processing on a 6502, then I should be able to do it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, I had very little RAM. The Commodore PET, as you know, was 8K. And the reality of text is that even though it doesn't use up much space, you'd be surprised how fast 8K disappears and you still have to have the software in there. So whatever you wrote had to fit in as little space as possible because it would use up the space you had to write your text. You know, so the early word processors, I tried to write it in BASIC, but I don't know if everybody remembers this. One of the big sort of bugaboos with the Commodore BASIC was garbage collection.
Yeah.
This means that you know, over time, assigned strings had to be collected because they would assign them to the first available block of memory, and then they would start to fragment all over the place. So eventually you had to collect them all together and pack them all in. Otherwise, it got to be very inefficient. But the garbage collection itself was a little slow. So you'd be running along in your program, and all of a sudden it would just seem to stop dead for a couple of seconds and then start up again. That was the garbage collection taking place. We didn't have the ability to do stuff in the background. There was only one thread of execution. So, you know, if it happens to be required that you got to go collect the garbage, then that's all the computer can do. It can't do anything else. Can't accept keyboard input. Can't do anything. So anyway, so I thought, okay, BASIC's not the way to go because I can't have a word processor with this garbage collection going on all the time. So I thought, okay, well, I got to write it in machine language, but there were no compilers at the time. So I had to learn how to hand assemble code. And the hard part about that was that you had to work out where all your jumps went to. They're sort of basically the go-to of machine language. And you had to sort of write out your code, and then you had to go through it and work out how much space it used up and where everything would fall in your code. It could be done, and for small stuff, it really wasn't that hard. But as things started to get a bit bigger and a little more complicated, you just couldn't keep up with it. And every time you had to make a change, you had to go through all this again. You had to assemble it in your head. So
that's why we had to solve the reset.
Yeah, so I said, okay, you know, by that time I already had a basic word processor, which I used as my editor, because you still need an editor to write your code. So I used my word processor as the editor, and well, it wasn't really a word processor at the time. I referred to it as a text editor. And actually, for anybody who might remember this, the original one, I called it the DCE text editor because it was direct cursor editing, is what that stood for. And I used that as the editor anyway, and I wrote my own compiler. I had to hand assemble that. So I hand assembled my own little compiler, and then I was able to actually compile the text editor that I was working on. And I did that until, as I mentioned, Commodore came up with their own official compiler, which was a lot more powerful than mine and you know, had a lot more thought put into it. So I switched everything over to that, and I never really used my hand compiled one again.
Yeah.
So anyway, eventually I had there were two parts to it, because remember what I told you, you don't have very much memory, so you have to keep it as small as possible. So I had the text editor and a separate program for printing, because that would use up memory too. At best, I think I got maybe 4K of memory to put text in, which is probably good for 1 or 2 pages of just text. So you would write your documents in the editor, and then you would load up the printing application, and you would select which documents you wanted to print, and then that program would take care of that. And I showed it around to a number of places in Toronto, and there was one called the Home Computer Center. They were located on Yonge Street, just north of Finch, and they said they were interested in selling it. So I said, okay. And I didn't really write up a formal contract with them, which was just as well because they did a crap job. And but the one thing that did come out of that, though, was that Stuart Martin, previously mentioned him, had bought a copy of that text editor from the Home Computer Center. And he lived near me, and he contacted me, and he said, I see great potential in this. I want to start a company with you to market this software. Yeah. So we got rid of Home Computer Center, and I started working on the actual WordPro program with Stuart at that point.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the size of your WordPro. The WordPro, I think it was like, what, 4K?
Right, if it was for the original 8K PET, yes, it was very, very small.
Yeah, it was a 4K. And then you went up further from when you went to the 8032.
Yeah, it had at least some reasonable amount of memory. But again, there still wasn't enough RAM to do very large documents.
Right.
You basically had to write individual documents and link them together. My system for linking them was using embedded codes. I used a little checkmark symbol, and they were codes for setting margins and linking documents to the next document.
Yeah, that reminds me too, Steve, that we also fiddled around with the WordPro when it came to relational database. Commodore was unique in having the ability to do relational databases with the IEEE interface on that. And we did a lot of porting around with the programming when it came to keeping files open onto Drive. So when you read and then you wrote, and it stayed there until you wrote again and added to it.
Well, they called them rel files, which kind of suggested relative databases, although technically that's not what it was. It was basically a system whereby you could access any byte within the file and read and write it at random. It was random access is what it was.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to do more database-related stuff because now we didn't have to write an entire file back just because we changed one little thing. We could go into the file, change just one teeny piece of it, and have just that track rewritten, which was much more efficient than rewriting an entire file. Because you remember how slow it was.
I can remember sequential files. I really didn't care for them.
No, because they required rewriting the whole thing. And of course, you remember, if you've been in it long enough, you remember cassettes.
Yeah.
You remember when we did not have disk drives, we had cassette tapes. And that was, I think, 110 baud, something along those lines. And so writing or reading even a 4K program could take a couple of minutes.
Keeping in mind on the and on the cassette, you had to remember it was redundant, so it'd be twice.
Yeah, so that probably halved the speed, but at least increased the reliability. It's kind of weird. I used to go around trying to find out what kind of cassette tapes would work best on a Commodore machine, and I always thought at first that it was going to be the higher quality tapes, ones for audio files, but they never seemed to work as well as these cheap cassettes that Kmart used to sell.
Oh,
they had orange labels on them. I think it was their corporate color at the time. And they were like $1.44 for 3 cassettes. It didn't matter how long they were because for the most part, you didn't need a very long tape. You were just putting one program on one tape.
Right. You learned that quick.
Yeah, so if you have like less than 50 cents per tape, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah,
and I found that
computers did a lot.
I found they worked exceptionally well for some reason, even though they were probably terrible tapes. If you tried to record audio on them, they just seemed to do well with whatever kind of encoding scheme they were using on those cassette tape recorders that came on the Commodore PETs.
Didn't you have another commercial program besides WordPro?
Yeah, we had one that was called MailPro, which was basically meant to be kind of like a database, but it was geared more to mailing lists and simple things like that.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and we did have other people working, on projects for us. We had a guy by the name of John Lamb when he was just a teenager. Now, John, he went on to actually get a degree in chemistry at the U of T, and now works for Microsoft.
Oh,
not doing chemistry, though.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Anyway.
Where's Templeton?
He's in California, I believe. For a while, he was, I forget what his position in the company, but he used to be in the, what are they called? The Electronic Frontiers Foundation or something.
Yeah.
He used to be.
Where's that now? Oh, he does
no,
that.
he was there. He's not there now.
Yeah.
I think
the guy I know that made it through Burning Man.
Yeah.
He was quite good for that.
You know that, I don't know, as an American, you may not know his father. But his father was Charles Templeton. And Charles Templeton was a well-known broadcaster and writer here in Canada. But he did write one book that was made into a movie that you may remember. It's called The Kidnapping of the President, I believe. And but anyway, he was well-known here in Canada. And so he was kind of like a son of a celebrity kind of guy.
Oh, yeah. Brad was a good guy. I remember him well. He was a good guy. I loved his time trick. So.
Yeah, that was cute. But anyway, what I was going to say about John Lamb, he wrote for us, the idea was we wanted to speed up the 41 drives
Right.
And one of their bottlenecks was that they were using serial cables instead of the IEEE parallel cables. And he worked out a way in machine code to use transmit maybe 4 bits at the same time on the serial cable, and this vastly sped up how fast you could read and write from those floppy drives.
Mm-hmm.
So we sold that for a while as well. Yeah, it was cool, and it did actually do the job.
Yeah, he did that was the fast load cartridge. I remember.
Yeah.
That was the first one that I remembered. But yeah, with the IEEE, you could only, it was just, you had to deal with it. That's all there was.
Yeah, well, the parallel port was fine, although the actual speed wasn't that great to begin with. But the serial.
Didn't you have troubles with the parallel port when you went to your printing routines and that?
Well, there was always trouble with one port or another on the Commodore machines because they didn't always work as well as they were supposed to. I mean, this is the days when, like, I remember being told by much older people that when cars were new, flats, for example, were common occurrences.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't drive more than, 10, 20 miles somewhere without having a flat. And you had to deal with this on a regular basis. People would do things like stuff hay into their tires just to keep them up so they could get somewhere.
Yeah.
And yet we today look at that and go, how on earth do you deal with something like that? Because we don't have flats all the time. And you may be lucky, you may not have a flat for 10 or 15 years. So flats are just not one of those things you give a damn about. They don't happen. And I guess in the early computer days, we dealt with problems that these days you just don't expect to have. Things should work, and they do for the most part. And I guess that was part of what makes the early days of anything fun, is because you're not just working on the technology, you're having to keep it working.
Yeah, and everything was new to us then.
And everything was new. You could easily be the foremost expert on something in your area by just simply knowing a few things that nobody else knew.
Yeah, like one guy used to tell me, just you read a chapter ahead. That's what.
Yeah. You can't be an expert on anything.
I think Butterfield told me that one time.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, obviously, the great thing about Jim Butterfield, for those who have seen him and heard him talk, was his incredible ability to talk to both novices and know-it-alls at the same time and keep them both interested.
Yeah.
That's a raw talent. It's really hard. If you talk down to the dummies, you lose the people that know what they're talking about, and if you talk up to them, you lose the dummies who don't know what you're talking about. And he had this knack for just splitting the difference and knowing how to deal with both these people at once.
Yeah, he was a dear friend. I still miss him. We used to have a blast.
Yeah, he was a fun guy, and he was good at jokes too. Like somehow he managed to insert just the right amount of humor into his talks that felt natural. It didn't feel like he spent some time writing dumb jokes to throw into his stuff. He just knew how to say the things that were humorous.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was great. I went out of my way to go and watch stuff that he talked about, even if I knew everything that he was talking about.
Yeah.
I didn't care. I just wanted to hear him talk about it.
Yeah, he had a knack for that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a program car too. I think he had a Stoner disassembler or something. Was that his?
I don't know if Butterfield actually ever wrote anything of any sort of importance. He
did something
into that.
He did some kind of product because he was on it with Pro.
Yeah. Well, we did a couple of these. We did a couple of these funny ads for publishing in magazines.
Yeah, I remember those.
It had me, Brad Templeton, and Butterfield, and we had one where we were dressed like football players.
Yeah,
I like that one. And what was the other one now?
You had the baseball ones.
Oh, baseball, yes. And
that's where somebody had some of the black lines underneath them.
Yeah, black lines underneath.
You looked good in that, Steve. You looked good.
Yeah, it was.
One thing that Jim wrote was a income tax program.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Was that what it was?
Yeah, but Jim's, as you well know, Jim's experience in computers goes well back before home computers.
Yeah, he did a lot of telecommunications.
Yeah, he was one of the old school computer guys.
Yeah.
Who was already well into computers when computers started for us. So
I remember
stuff.
I remember one time at a TPUG meeting, he was doing you talk about humor. I think it was a thing on COMAL, and there was somehow or another you could name things in it, and then you could execute them. And he did a little routine, and he called it Punter. And then he said, "Now we can execute Punter."
Yeah.
Or if you remember.
Well, it was kind of funny. You know how I first met Jim, and he had joked about this numerous times, is I would go downtown where there were a number of stores that had Commodore pets on display and people could play with them. And I would go down there and I would meet with people and we would exchange programs. And I got this one program where he had asked for a quarter, if you used it. And I remember calling out and going, "You can't do that." And he apparently roasted me for that for a long time. But that's how I first contacted him. And it was kind of a weird way to meet somebody.
Yeah, one quick and easy Butterfield story I have is that I had written up a book called How to Get the Most Out of Geos, way back in when I had Commodore 64 Geos and that. And I was speaking up in Canada, and Butterfield, the night before we had dinner together and stuff, and he was going on about the communication stuff within Geos and different things to work with. And he said, "Look," he says, "this is what you should know right now." He says, "Because tomorrow someone's going to ask you this question." Well, they're not going to ask me that question, Jim. It's okay. He goes, "No," he said, "someone's going to ask you this question. You're going to have to know the answer so that these people understand what you know about this stuff." I said, okay. So he gave me a line of stuff to answer this question. So I never thought anything of it. So the next day I was in the big group and they were at question and answer time, and I was listening and talking, and Butterfield walked in and sat down at the meeting, and I just said hello and all that. And then within a couple of questions, Butterfield puts his hand up, and I said, "Yes." And he asked me that question that he had told me that was going to come the night before. So he asked me that question, and he looked right at me. He says, "Don't screw it up." And so I gave the right answer to that thing, and everybody was happy. So funny. He set me up the night before. It was great.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was fun. It was fun in those days. I don't think you realized how much fun you were having until after you looked back at it a few years later.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
That was really fun. I should have paid more attention or something. And as much as I don't tend to sort of do much with 8-bit computers, I'm still programming, so I'm still writing in modern languages with modern stuff. So it's just interesting to look back on it every now and then and say, hey, that was an interesting time. Things have changed. We're doing things differently now. And I know that you don't tend to get a lot of young people interested in this. It's just historic stuff,
Yeah.
But you occasionally get some that do find it interesting. And again, if they want to actually wrap their heads around a computer, why not an 8-bit computer? It's doable.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you honestly, Steve, when I was back in late 77, when Jim Strausman and I were starting Midnight Gazette, and when I got your Word Pro, your first word processor, very earliest one on the PET, that was the first time I ever used a word processor. And the very next day, I put away my typewriter forever. I never touched a typewriter after that point.
Yeah, I used to type a lot.
Processor from that point on.
Before I had a computer, I had typewriters, and I used to type everything. So I had a lot of stuff that I typed, and I was very good at typing, so computers were natural for me.
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw that word processor at the place where I was working and said to myself, I got to have one of those.
Yeah.
So basically the time between my first use of a word processor and having my own one to work with was very short. It was only a few months.
Yeah, I had never used a word processor before yours. Yours was the first one. So it's my favorite, Steve.
Well, you could say that it was definitely old school because it didn't attempt to maintain format on the screen. I mean, we would hardly ever consider using word processors now that didn't show you what you were going to print.
Right.
Right. But back then, I felt that it was more efficient to just deal with text as text and then deal with formatting as formatting. I granted that, in depending on the circumstances, that was probably not the right idea. But for what I used it for, it was definitely just fine. I mean, I do stuff now with Microsoft Word where I put it into a mode where basically I get rid of the formatting and I just have raw text.
Right.
Except for italics and boldface and a few things like that. Because I'm not interested in the formatting. I'm interested in the data.
Yeah, I do the same thing with notepads on the PC. I'd rather use Notepad, and then once I'm done, then I stick it in a word processor and deal with it. It makes it a lot easier. I can still remember how many problems we used to horse around trying to get it fixed with Word Pro, especially with graphics. That was always a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Always.
Well, Commodore PET did not have graphics as we know it today. It had those things we used to know as of graphic characters, which were a very well designed set of characters that blended together so you could draw lines and corners and things like that. And you could actually sort of crudely draw stuff, especially boxes, which was important for highlighting certain things. And it really was useful, those characters. And they date all the way back to the first Commodore PET, the one with the chiclet keyboard. So I bought my first Commodore PET in 1978, and it was one of the first ones that was actually on sale. Actually, a place where I was working at the time, they actually ordered it for me and had it delivered to them so I could pick it up. And, and when you think about just how little you were getting for how much you were paying, that was expensive. When I bought that original Commodore PET, it was $1,200.
Yeah, Canadian.
And
$7.99 for me.
Yeah, so basically, you translate that into today's dollars, and that's like paying $5,000, $6,000 for something that had 8K of memory, a teeny little chiclet keyboard, a 40-column monochrome display, and a cassette tape for storing things.
Yeah. Well, that $7.99 plus shipping I did, it was New England in NECO, NECCO.
Yeah, I remember them.
But I paid for that. You remember those guys. When I bought it back then, that was a month's salary. That's how confident I was that this was going to be a big deal. I knew that much anyway. But loved all the stuff. Loved the Commodore PET stuff.
Steve, you could sell today for the same money.
Yeah, probably. And people say that's cheap.
$1,200 in '78 was $4,500. Oh my God!
You can get that out of Google.
No wonder I was broke after that.
Yeah. Well, lots of things were expensive back then. Around, I guess, in the early '80s, I wanted to have a camcorder. Well, not a camcorder in the sense we know them now. A video recorder with a camera, right? And the VCR part cost $3,000 from Sony. There was a tuner part that went with it. That was another $1,000 or so, and then you had to have a camera. So you imagine spending that kind of money that would now be worth $15,000 just to be able to record relatively crappy videos.
Yeah. The floppy drives, like the 2020, I bought a 2020, and that meant that that year I could go on vacation with my family because I had to pay for that. And then went from the 2020, to the 4040. There was a big difference between the PET original PET Basic versus 2.0, and then on to 4.0.
Yeah.
2.0 cleaned up a lot of stuff, but the 4.0, I wish they would have started that to begin with. But made it easier.
Well, that's like saying, we should have had modern languages in the first place, except you can't.
Yeah,
You
it
had
would've been
whatever
easier.
anybody could develop at the time. And they didn't have anything to go on, so everything was basically the first iteration of everything.
Yeah, it was.
So it was like the first. It was built on maybe some languages that have been around on other computers for a while, but they had to make it all fit in that relatively tiny amount of space. That was really one of the great things about the BASIC, is that it gave you a fair bit of power by using very small ROM footprint on a machine that gave you very little RAM and gave you very little space to do anything. Just the maximum addressing space of that processor was tiny anyway. So even if you were using ROMs, you were still using up some of a very limited resource.
Yeah.
Another thing that,
do you remember the days we used to do the one-liners?
how much you can get in one line?
Yeah.
Well, you know what language was great for that? It was this language called APL, which, funny enough, stood for A Programming Language. I believe it was developed at the U of T, but it was used elsewhere. But it really looks like hieroglyphics. It's all symbolic. The symbols mean things. And you could write some incredibly complex stuff in a single line of APL. People wrote programs that could play and beat you at tic-tac-toe in a single line.
Oh, wow.
But you're trying to read it? Oh, readability was not its strong point.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was one of its worst aspects. But it was a fascinating language to work with. Somebody actually, I think we did have an APL available on Commodore machines. You remember the University of Waterloo used to produce a number of languages for the Commodore machines. And I think they did an APL.
Yeah, I remember with the SuperPet. That's how I learned COBOL, Fortran. There was 2 other languages, CPM, something else I did. That helped a lot to learn that stuff with the SuperPet I had.
Yeah. No, it was rather amazing what they managed to stuff into there. But things certainly have actually already gotten smaller by the time that came around. There's this picture floating around on the internet that shows up on a number of YouTube videos. A picture of them loading an 8 megabyte hard drive into an aircraft to ship it from IBM, and the thing was as big as a car. You used a forklift to load it.
Yeah.
Just 8 megabytes.
Yeah.
And so, so by the time, we can grumble about the size of those 9090s and 9060 hard drives.
Oh, man.
They were tiny compared to the IBM machines that preceded it.
Yeah.
That place, one of the other places I worked, they had an old IBM mid-range size computer. I forget what model it was. And it had a 60 megabyte hard drive in it. And one time when I had to look in there, I looked at the size of those things, and the platters must have been 8 or 10 inches. And the drive looked like what we were used to looking at hard drives now, only it was huge.
Yeah.
That was 60 megabytes, which is actually fairly, big at the time, but not that big.
Yeah. Yeah, now we're talking petabytes.
Yeah. Oh, I think it was a System 34. If I remember correctly.
That was a popular one.
Ancient. It was ancient at the time.
Yeah.
But they got it cheap, so. And it ran things like Fortran. I think that was its primary language. Because Fortran was really good for business applications. It was kind of developed for that. But whatever, if that's what it was. But it was already ancient hardware when I started working there. And if Jay was still here, he would have told you, because he got me the job there when he was quitting. So he remembers that place.
Yeah. So Templeton's in California, and that.
I believe he's still in California. I do still occasionally see stuff from him. I think he posts things on LinkedIn. But he got into this. I don't know. Last things I saw him posting a lot of stuff about was all alternative energy automobiles and stuff. That seemed to be what he was into. I don't know what he's doing today.
Yeah. Does anybody know, because most of you guys are TPUG, Is Butterfield's family doing okay? His daughter and his wife is still around, I assume.
I don't know if
Yeah, I
anybody.
think I heard about him like a couple years ago, and they were doing okay. But I couldn't tell you more than that. I really don't know.
Yeah. It's been a few years since I've gotten a Christmas card from her, so that's why I was wondering. I still got cards from her even after Jim passed.
I wish I could tell you more, but I just don't know. I suppose somebody here can reach out.
If anybody knows them, I don't.
Unfortunately, I don't either, but I'm sure there are people here who do.
Yeah, there must be somebody.
Yeah, as I said, I had seen the email to me about this Zoom meeting, and you and Steve Punter was going to be on. And I'll tell you, you sure brought back a lot of memories from my Starship MPC back in, that had to be what, 83, 84?
It would have been early 80s. That's when I started my first
Early
BBS
80s,
was
yeah.
81. Yeah, almost 40 years ago. So yeah, quite a while ago.
Yeah. Art Kimball and I, you had a manual. My God, it looked like it was a 3-ring binder that had to be at least 300 pages. Half of it was notes. And I think a lot of it had a lot of your basic listings in the book as well. I think there was some in there. So we could look at it without having to go up on the computer and do it. But I forget how we got to, with you, how we communicated with you. I think it wasn't by phone. It was more messages to TPUG to send to you. And then you gave us some answers from things, because we were one of the earliest ones that had a hard drive for Commodore. It was before Commodore's 9060, 9090s. It was like, I think it was a XETEC. It was called Z-Tech.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they were good friends of ours because we sold a lot of the hard drives. And but going back to your Proline software, I was just going to mention to you, we sold thousands of your Proline software. Remember Stewart, we were the U.S. Exclusive distributor, as he said. So anybody that bought WordPro in the United States came through our company, MPC. So I hope you did well, Steve.
Actually, I did.
Good.
I don't think I became filthy rich or anything, but I did well during that time.
I'm glad to hear that. You didn't talk to me much back then, Steve.
Well, it's easier to talk to people now.
Steve, is it okay to change topics slightly?
Sure.
Hi, I'm Kent. I live way out in the Seattle area of all places.
Yeah. Microsoft.
I was there for about a lifetime. I left about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've taken an interest in Commodore 128 productivity software. It's a sickness. And a TPUG member here who's not here today, Dan, is similarly afflicted. And we have been on it's now a multi-year quest to track down as many original versions of the Canadian-born Paperback and Pocket software, which was a company called Digital Solutions, DSI. And lo and behold, trolling the internet, we came across I'll just call it what the kids would call it anyway, a cracked version of the very first program that company released and the very first version of it. So it was this thing called Paperback Writer, and it was a version 1.05 or something. And guess whose name was in the credits there, the opening screen? Steve Punter.
Why would I?
And I just wonder, it's for the Commodore 64. I just wonder if you have any memory of that, because that would have been what 1985?
What application was that?
So the company was DSI, Digital Solutions Incorporated, and it was Paperback.
Oh, Paperback Writer.
Commodore 64.
Oh, okay.
We sold a lot of those for the Commodore 64, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I never had anything to do with them. I don't know why they were crediting me. Maybe they were just mentioning me, but
You're
I
so
had nothing to do with that.
Yeah,
maybe I inspired them. I don't know.
Yeah, well, maybe so.
Maybe they swiped routines.
Like that.
Yeah.
So that software, partly why we're spending so much effort trying to preserve the various versions, is it has some of the most sophisticated copy protection of any Commodore program, which seems a little nuts because that kind of effort was usually reserved for games. But for whatever reason, they put some really sophisticated copy protection. So we realized if we didn't expend some effort here, once the original discs die, there'll be no way to see it anymore. And so this version that has your name on it, it appears as if, not to say you ever wore a black hat in your life, but it appears that you liberated the program from its copy protection. That's what the screen appears to be.
That does not sound right. I was not as much a hacker back then. I don't think I would have been able to. I have no memory whatsoever of any really dealings with that software. The only thing with paper in its name that sticks in my mind is Paperclip, because Steve Douglas and Paperclip were my big competition.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I can remember with Paperback Writer, with the company that we were the U.S. MPC again. We were the U.S. distributor for those guys.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, we were the only distributor. If you bought it at a retail store, it came from our warehouse.
That's really
Champaign, Illinois. And we got to know the guys there quite well. You're right. It was very difficult to break their code.
Yeah.
It was very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. The tools we're using now, of course, all run on the PC, and they're making flux level images of the discs.
Yeah, they got it easy these days.
Oh yeah, it's so different.
Except for WordPro, Steve. Except for WordPro.
Anyway.
Well, we tried our hand at copy protection. It was only ever ROMs, but that was a bad idea because.
Was that Stuart's idea for the dongle?
I think so, because the dongles were one thing, but regardless, there was only so many ROM sockets and ports that you could plug things into, and so if it was a ROM, if you had the ROM for WordPro and you wanted to run something else that needed a ROM, you had to pull the ROM and put another one in, and that was stupid. So it was a very disliked version of copy protection that I think all of those ones went away fairly quickly. The other kind that were common were ones that damaged the disk in very specific ways, which I think may be what you're talking about, where they can only be read if it doesn't find this particular bit of damage, then it doesn't assume that they're legit. I remember that as being one method. I don't think we ever did that.
Yes.
We were mostly just ROMs and dongles.
Yeah.
But like I said, their problem was that there's kind of a limited supply of that. You have to keep unplugging and plugging things in to use different software.
Right.
Can't you would just as an FYI, the reason why I know this stuff is because one of my dearest friends, Dick Emmers, wrote the book on Commodore DOS.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that name. Sure.
Yeah, Dick Emmers. He's a very dear friend.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know if some of the folks here. I'm the guy behind what was called Dr. Evil Labs. We made the Sid Symphony stereo cartridge and the SwiftLink 232 stereo cartridge back in the day. Both CMD bought both of those products from us.
Very cool.
Yeah, we didn't make any money, but it sure was fun. Yeah, so Steve, you also mentioned Batteries Include. Was that a Canadian company also?
Yep, Steve Douglas lived around here too.
Oh, interesting.
It was interesting that back in those days, it was one of the few times when Canada was the center of the universe as far as things went in the Commodore world. Commodore Canada was actually the original Commodore,
right?
Like the Toronto-based part, and that's where their president was from. And so everything Commodore is centered out of here.
Yeah.
Which was kind of really weird to have everything so local. And then Steve Douglas was local. There's a lot of a lot of things were based out of Toronto or the University of Waterloo, which is just 80 kilometers from here.
Mhm.
So yeah, a lot of things, just local stuff.
That's
But-
cool. Yeah, I love the paperclip on my Commodore 64 because I lucked into one of the batteries included 80 column cards. And I actually had to do a fair bit of writing for my college work. So having 80 columns on a 64 was great. And I was all excited about Paperclip 3, I think, working with the BI 80 card. And then I discovered if you pressed run stop, it would freeze. And we tried to contact Batteries Included, and they were hard to find at the time. So a friend of mine who later went on to be quite a computer programming wizard, he stepped through the code, which mostly was copy protection by obfuscation, and they used undocumented opcodes and all kinds of things. And he actually found that they had a 1-bit bug in their keyboard map on that key, and that's what caused it to lock up. So he took pity on me and changed it. I don't remember what the value was, raised it or lowered it one number and saved it out for me. And then I was able to go happily on my way. And then later we discovered they had kind of a support desk on Quantum Link. And I was able to contact them and say, hey, we fixed a bug in your program. And they actually had us send it to them. I don't know what they ever did with it, but yeah, there's some fond memories there, certainly.
That's weird. But I know Paperclip was just a competition for me.
Right. Yeah. I never had, for whatever reason, I never had the opportunity to use WordPro, which seems weird in retrospect. But anyway, I'm sure glad you're here. You've got some great history you're sharing.
Yeah. If there's anything else you want to know.
Hey, Kent, do you have a screenshot of that you can share where Steve's credited?
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
I do. Let me see. I think the easiest thing for me to do would be to bring it up, the image up in Vice, and then take a screenshot of it. So give me a couple minutes and I'll share that.
Okay.
Can we share files to the chat, or what's the best way to do that?
Oh my gosh. Richard,
I think they came up in another meeting I had today at work, and I don't think you can share a file over chat. But we do have the Toronto CBM mailing list.
Right, and I'm on that.
You're on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is just to send it through there.
Okay. And then that can make its way to Steve somehow.
Yeah.
Anyway, can you just give Kent host privileges and you can share screen?
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, of course. Yes. Just a moment.
Yeah, and I don't need them just yet. I have to dig up the image, but soon.
I'll make you co-host right now anyway. Done.
Hey, Steve, you can see Richard Bradley there's got a nice picture. That was when I was pretty.
Yeah.
with Butterball. Nice picture. I don't think I have that shirt anymore.
What did it say, the shirt? I'm not what?
So, Steve, were you able to preserve any of your software?
A little bit of it. We don't have all the different versions and all the different copies. I did, however, there was a guy, it was a few years back, he came to the world of Commodore and he was trying to collect as much Commodore software as he could get. And he was putting it all into a little library. And we brought him every single floppy disk we could find around the house and let him copy off whatever he could read off of those things. And there were some word pros on there. I can't remember, I got his name written down. I can tell you who he is, but he wanted to create an archive of everything Commodore. So I'm sure that if they exist, that he'd probably have it.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious if they were converted to ADF files.
I don't know if he did that or not. Yes, we have a really small world, kind of weird things. In some of the boxes of the early WordPros, they show a young woman sitting at WordPro, typing, and it was on the manuals and stuff. That was actually Stuart's daughter, who I discovered very early on, for some reason, knew my sister, even though there was no connection between myself and Stuart up to that point. So, small world stuff.
So, to answer the question on the t-shirts, Jim and Jim had matching t-shirts. One said, "I'm not Jim Oldfield," and that was Jim Butterfield's shirt. And the other one says, "I'm not Jim Butterfield," and that was Jim Oldfield's shirt. And that's the ones in the picture behind me.
That was crazy times.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think I had gotten contacted by someone that was what Steve was saying about collecting a lot of the old Commodore stuff, because I still have most of the software that I sold in our Midnight Gazette. You know, still had all those articles and software and stuff. I keep wanting to think. I don't know if it was a guy named Zimmerman, something like that.
That sounds familiar somehow.
I know, it sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, he's a guy in Texas that collects Commodore stuff.
Bo Zimmerman, I think that's his name.
Yeah, he came up from the U.S. to the World of Commodore show a few years back.
Is that who I'm thinking of?
Yeah, there's a fellow named Zimmerman in the U.S. that has a massive collection. He's if you go to his website, zimmers.net, like there's photos. They're fairly poor quality photos. I guess they've been taken a long time ago, but of his collection, he has like every prototype of every Commodore computer imaginable. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you wanted to see what the prototypes look like, you could go to his website, and he's got it fairly well documented with photography over there.
Yeah, I sent a few of my old pieces of hardware that were duplicated. Like I had one that's still rare. I remember the voice for the Commodore PET. I had a couple extras of those. What else? I had an old 8010 modem. Some other stuff, odds and ends, things I had duplicates of. But he seemed like a nice guy. He seemed sincere on collecting absolutely everything. So.
Well, if it's the same guy, yeah, he wanted everything that we could loan to him.
Yeah, I even gave him some of my old. See, I used to be a Commodore dealer back in '81, and so I got two. Whenever I bought things for the store, I at least bought two. One to sell and one for me to keep. So I kept like a lot of stuff over the years, a lot of hardware, a lot of software. So it's been, every once in a while I drag something out to play with it for a while, and I get it out of my system and I go put it back in the closet.
I didn't keep a lot of equipment, in part because over the years I had globs of it because, various bits of hardware that I needed to work on. But I did keep my original chiclet Commodore computer, which I do have. I remember making an external keyboard for it. I bought a cheap keyboard from Radio Shack and modified the wiring on it and wired it up into the PET. So I had a full-size keyboard instead of the chiclet keyboard. Now, my fingers are not huge, and I was able to type on that little keyboard. I told you I had lots of practice from typewriter days. But I could actually, keep my fingers close together, and I actually got quite proficient at typing on that little tiny keyboard.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't really arranged like a proper keyboard.
It was quite a skill. That's for sure.
It was. I'm sure most people one finger typed it.
No. I also had a somebody had sent us a keyboard for Midnight Gazette to review. And after I gave it a great review, I kept it. So. But it was nice. It made a big difference because we wrote the magazine was done on Commodore computers. And so it was a real pistol to put together a 32-page magazine on a Commodore PET. Believe me, it wasn't easy. Yeah, Zimmerman, that rings a bell. I thought that's. still, every once in a while, I keep an eye on eBay. I notice some of the old pet software goes for big bucks these days. I haven't seen any Word Pros or ProLine software yet, Steve, but
Yeah.
sure it'd be worth a lot of money.
You would think so, but I don't know. It's hard to, I don't know how, I mean, obviously they want original packaging because software alone is nothing. You can copy that to your heart's content. So there's no particular rarity in a digital copy of a piece of software, but having the original packaging and the original discs, that would be worth something to a collector.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I didn't really keep very much of that. And this is where you kick yourself for, throwing away stuff. Somebody shows up on Antiques Roadshow with something you owned and go, how much is that worth? You can only sell that for $60,000.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
All right, I can do a brief screen share if people want me to about the thing I remember from that cracked image that I have. Would that be interesting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me see here. This is a pretty big monitor, so in order for that to not look so tiny for people, I'm going to load the image in Paint, I think, and just share the Paint screen. So let me do that.
Doesn't have to be perfect.
No, I just don't want it to be tiny. It can, can be kind of hard to see in Zoom sometimes. All right, so let's size down the window there. Okay, go back to share.
Oh, he's doing it. The Bradley brothers. You guys have a channel on YouTube, don't you?
Okay, so it says share screen. Is it going to give me the chance? Oh, yes. Okay, good. I have to go one click further then. All right. Here we go. Here's the menu. Can all of you see that?
Yep.
Oh, that's, I didn't realize what had happened. There's a rotating thing at the bottom. And so by the time I pressed all print screen, it had changed. And now it says copyright 1985 Digital Solutions. So let me show you the other two images, and I'll have to go back and recapture the one that actually shows Steve's name. I didn't realize it was a scrolling or.
Can you just run the Vice program and share that?
On this computer, I cannot. I had to switch from one to another. Here's what the title screen looks like when you finish loading. And this early version of Paperback Writer had this very ornate way of, the name of the program kind of had this old English look to it.
Yeah.
That was jettisoned pretty early on. There was only a couple first release or so. And then this is what it looked like. I loaded the 80 column version, which was the second choice in that menu. So let me go really fast back and capture that again. Sorry, it caught me by surprise.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
I remember working with Dave with this software, and it came out, and it's a short story. The background for digital was that since we were the U.S. distributor for them, and the president of Micropace at the time, he would talk to the secretary, one of the accounting people or whatever, and they got together. They got to be friends and that on the phone, and they eventually met, and they actually eventually married. And when we were in Illinois, so we had a different connection to digital solutions back then. It was it was interesting. I forgot what else he did. The word processor. They also did the database, and didn't they do the spreadsheet as well? I can't remember. It's been a while. Digital Solutions. Mr. Foster.
All right, I can load that one up now and show you that. All right. Here we go.
Hey, way to go, Steve.
Oh, nice.
Arr.
That's weird because I never did that.
Yeah, so could there be two Steve Punters in the Commodore world? I mean, I guess it's not out of the question.
Well, as far as having looked up my name on the internet over a period of time, the only other Steve Punter of any note at all that you'll find on the internet is a journalist in Australia. And that's the only other occurrence of my name that I've ever run into that you'll find these days.
So I guess
Wikipedia.
I guess this could have been
Did I say Wikipedia?
A teenage male who had less need to have something stroke his ego and more of a need to make some sort of inside joke to himself, and so he gave you credit for something he did. I would think. Why.
I would think so. Yes.
Maybe it was Butterfield.
Yeah.
Anyway, did somebody say I said Wikipedia by mistake there?
Yes, I did.
Oh yeah, I meant to say just on Google search generally. If you look up Steve Punter, you will of course find lots and lots of references to me. But if you type Steve Punter in Australia, you should find more of the references to the other guy. But he's the only other one I've ever really found. I'm sure that the name shows up elsewhere. By the way, it's kind of weird. My name is in the IMDb database, and the reason I'm in that was because of that movie, that BBS documentary movie. Apparently, IMDb, he listed everyone he interviewed as starring in the movie. And as a result, you end up at least with a a listing in IMDb, but you have to pay if you want to have it say anything.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but it is. My name's in there.
I think somebody's trying to frame you.
Yes, I think in this case, yes.
So one of the, just really quickly, since I've got the screen share, one of the things that I've got on eBay, which was a total surprise, I'll have to make this a little bigger and then zoom out probably. This image is bigger. This was the first release of Paperback Writer for the Commodore 128. And so they used the 64 case and the 64 manual, and they put a label on it saying that it's for the 128. And then when you look inside, you see a hand labeled disc, not like they did later, machine printed. And along with the 64 book, they had, it's like 6 pages stapled about what's different from the 128 version. And they carefully cut it so that when folded in half, it would fit in the indentation in the pack, in the box. So it was clearly done by them and not by somebody else. But that was a total shock to me to find that. But it's been fun because, you know, Dan and I we're on this mission to archive every version we can. And so I guess we're becoming the unofficial historians of DSI. Who knew that that was my calling in life?
That's still interesting. I did not know about that, my name appearing in that. That's funny.
Yeah, we've done. I thought Steve Punter, why was he doing that? You know, did he have some sort of blackguard side hustle? And we're like, no, I better ask him if he.
I was not a hacker. I did not hack that. I would have basically lacked the skills to probably have done that, even if I wanted to. So, especially if it was really good copy protection, because it was not run of the mill.
Oh my gosh, so nasty.
It was not easy to break. It was not easy.
In that case, it wouldn't have been me. It wasn't my forte.
Well, anyway, it's great to meet you virtually, Steve. I didn't have my camera on. I should turn my camera on just so you can see. It's been great. Thank you.
Yes, you were just in disembodied voice.
Yeah, I know. That's irritating.
Steve, I'm going to sign off here pretty quick. I just wanted to say thank you very much for showing up here tonight.
You're welcome.
It's good to see you again, old friend. We've got a lot of years behind us, huh?
Yeah.
Is there any Punter BBS still floating around outside of Starship?
Not that I'm aware of. The only guy who sort of showed any interest in running my software for any length of time, and I'm sure many of you remember him, Roman Kowalczuk.
Oh yeah! Oh my God!
There's some debate over whether he's still alive. That Jay was looking him up to see whether he could find out if he was still around.
Yeah.
But it's funny, for all of his weirdness, the one thing that he was ahead of his time on, he was always big on keywords, for search capabilities and that.
Yeah.
And everybody thought he was just wasting his time, but now that sort of thing is very important. So in a way, he was ahead, but he was kind of weird guy that everybody thought, you shouldn't take seriously. But I don't think everything about him was like that, but people will make fun of him.
Yeah.
He used to run a number of BBSs under a bunch of rather odd names, like Out of Africa, I think was what he called one of his BBSs.
Yeah.
The name of that movie that was out around then. He worked for the post office.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember most of the people I remember from TPUG back in the late 70s. We used to go up every year we go up to World of Commodore in the 70s. It was like for us in the US, it was like coming home to the Mecca, That's where Commodore's headquarters was at the time. And, everything was going on up there in Canada at TPUG.
I don't know, TPUG had a lot of members at one point. I don't know what the exact numbers were, but it was like in the tens of thousands at some point.
Yeah. You probably don't remember, but we did, Strassman and I did a Midnight Gazette book with TPUG. It was the whole pet catalog. And we did that with TPUG. And we sold a lot of those. So we printed up a lot of those books. There's a lot of reprints from our stuff. The TPUG members also provided a lot of reviews and things back then.
Well, a number of other names you might remember from Commodore Canada were Carl Helden.
Oh yeah, Carl.
Carl started the Transactor magazine.
Yeah.
And he worked at Commodore Canada. Another guy you probably heard of was Paul Higginbottom.
Oh yeah, where's Paul at?
I don't know what happened to him. I mean, he was from Britain. I don't know if he went back, but
I don't think he went back.
I don't know what happened to him. I've not heard of him.
Well, I remember Gail Wellington. Remember Gail?
Actually, I don't.
Oh.
But those were the two guys at Commodore Canada I knew well.
Yeah, I still talk to Carl. But about once every 2 or 3 months, I get a Facebook message from him.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, checking in on us. Who else was in there? Oh my gosh, there was several.
Oh yeah, going back to the whole pet catalog, I'm not sure. Wasn't Bruce Beach part of that?
Yeah, Bruce Beach was part of that thing too.
I remember that name.
He died recently.
3 years ago.
I don't think it was quite that long ago, but he still had his school buses.
Oh, did he?
Oh yeah, they're still there.
Oh my gosh!
But actually, see, that was in the days when the Torpet and the TPUG split, and it wasn't pretty.
Right.
And then came the TPUG magazine, and the Torpet carried on. And the last issue of the Torpet I ever saw was, I think it was in one of those Service Canada offices, and it was something about join my ship full of people. And it was today's oceanic something or other research project of tomorrow. And it was Bruce. And I don't know how.
Oh my God. Yeah, Bruce. I don't think Bruce was well liked after he did the Torpet. Or was that what it was? Was Torpet magazine?
That was Carl Helden that did that. No, he's Transactor. Sorry. Transactor. Who did Torpet?
The Torpet was one of those things where it all started and Bruce did it, but it was the club magazine, but he owned the name or something, and then it got into a fight and then they split, and out came the book. And actually, they carried on a little bit, but yeah, it was not a funny. Sorry, it was not a fun time during the split, and
Well, I
was
can
much
recall that kind of stuff when, when that all that went down, because, then he wanted to Bruce wanted to take over Midnight Gazette because we had taken over the paper. And so he did some offers and things, but at the time he couldn't come through with anything. So it was like, we're just going to keep publishing our magazine. Thanks for asking. And so that was about the last time I talked to Bruce back then. That's about it. Does anybody remember Midnight Soccer Gazette?
I think I may have seen it once.
Steve?
But, yeah, but
I sent you
don't think I ever read
freebies.
it.
Steve, I sent you free ones.
Yeah, that must be where I saw it. But it wasn't one of the magazines that sort of sticks in my memory. I remember early computer magazines before Commodore really got off the ground. The Compute magazines, Kilobyte, people like that.
Yeah.
I used to look through them because they would publish listings of software that you could type into your computer. And if it was in BASIC, you could usually manage to get it to work on a Commodore, even if it wasn't designed for that. So that used to be fun, typing in other pieces of software and seeing if you get them to work.
Well, when
But you know where my
Kilobyte, yeah.
You know where my programming really started?
77. I'm sorry.
You know where I really got started on programming? Is programmable calculators.
Mm-hmm.
I had programmable calculators going back to 1976. I even had an HP 67, if anybody remembers those. They had the magnetic cards that would record data and software on them. So, they're one of the rare programmable calculators. You didn't have to punch the software in every time you wanted to use it, because that used to be pretty much the lot of anybody wishing to use a programmable calculator. Is every time you wanted to use software, you cleared the memory and you typed in the relatively simple piece of software. Again, yeah. But the little magnetic cards, they were cool. The thing had a motor built into it. It would just pull it right through from one side to the other and read the contents of the card. And you could flip them over and it would read the other side. So you'd have two sides on one card. Like not sides, like top and bottom. And they were cool. I used to write like weird kinds of games that used data cards that load in data, and different parts of the game would be on different cards because there was still a very serious limitation in the amount of space. It was 256 steps in your code, and steps, of course, in programmable calculators were whatever you could type.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to do, I belonged to the Homebrew Club in Illinois, and it was with, we used to load in, I can remember sitting there for half an hour loading in BASIC off a tape, and then having a Star Trek, an 8K Star Trek, that would take almost 45 minutes to load that in. And God forbid the fool that would turn that PC off before everybody had a chance to play the game, because then you had to do another hour and a half worth of prepping to get that MSI to even work right. It was crazy. The Commodore PET was so much better.
It's funny, speaking of old things, I still have an HP calculator. It is actually programmable. It's not one of their fancy ones. It's the HP16C. But
oh my gosh,
the styling on a 40-year-old device.
Oh my gosh. Now see, I couldn't afford one of those pads now. I had to do it on a notepad.
I still use this thing because it does hexadecimal conversions and stuff, and it's useful.
Oh my gosh.
It's a useful calculator, even though it's ancient.
That's crazy.
I liked HP because I knew how to use RPN. Nobody would borrow your calculator because they say, oh, it's an HP, never mind, I can't use those.
Yeah.
But I liked RPN, actually, as weird as it was. But HP was the only real follower. For those who don't know, a typical calculator, if you wanted to add two numbers, you'd say 2 plus 2 equals, right? And that's the keys you press. On reverse Polish notation, you would say 2, enter, 2 plus. And it had a stack. So, for example, if you wanted to add those two numbers and multiply by 3, you could say 2, enter, 2, enter, 3, enter, multiply, add. And it would either add or multiply the two things that were at the top of the stack.
Yeah, I was
But
just
for
going
most
to say, I
people,
remember, some of those HPs you learned how to do, how you stack your numerals.
yeah. And for most people, it just wasn't worth it. You know?
Yeah, well, you get one answer and then you can do another one and then it would stack. And then you take those two answers and work those through.
Right. So you had to be fully cognizant of your order of execution, right? That multiplication and division had to come before addition and subtraction and things like that. Most calculators will figure that out for you if they're just, the ordinary kind. I think HPs and the RPN thing were really kind of calculators for geeks.
Like this one right here.
Which one's that?
48SX.
When'd that one come from?
From HP?
No, what year?
Oh, yeah, it's probably 90s, late 90s.
Yeah, that HP 41C is early 80s. So it's kind of as old as most of the Commodore stuff we've been talking about.
It's amazing. Everybody I know who uses the reverse Polish notation loves it. That you can't pry those HP calculators out of people's hands. It's just impossible.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. It had a cult following like nothing you could ever imagine in a calculator.
It's true.
Yep. Well, yeah, we ran a bulletin board with software for this 48SX.
Oh, yeah.
Games.
But the good thing about HPs back then is, man, they ever built them well. Like that 41C I got there, it gets relatively daily use, but it's still rock solid. It's got no chips in it. The keys all work extremely well. The display works great. Except for being a little dusty, it really does look almost as good as it did when it was new. And they just built them well. Of course, nobody builds stuff to last anymore because it'll be out of date anyway. So I make it last 10 years when you won't want to use it in 10 years' time.
My unit has IR on it, so I can change channels on the TV.
Ooh, that's useful. I remember when smartphones came with IR. They stopped putting that in ages ago, but as a cute little addition that you could use to transfer data across from a phone to a device that used IR like a TV.
I used to do that with my Palm Pilot. I never kept business cards. I just had a button on my Palm Pilot, and I just transferred digitally my business card. It was great for me.
Yeah, well, PDAs, I guess, as they were back in those days, they had a lot of followers too. Even though they didn't do much on their own, what they did do was very useful.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
the Palm Pilot was great.
Yeah, they were, of course, the forerunners of smartphones.
Oh, there's a good one from Richard.
Yeah.
How old is that, Richard?
Can you hear us? You asked him questions a couple of times.
No, I mute because I try to be polite. This has got to be from the 70s.
Yeah. Wow.
And the other one I have is actually in the black case.
Oh, I don't know where it is, but my wife
There's another one like it.
My wife has a Commodore calculator.
And in fact, this one's on.
That one, Commodore?
No. Oh my God.
0.
Oh yeah, it works. LED and the LED display or whatever.
There you go. Bunch of 7s for you.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Those displays suck the battery dry.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. One is actually a CBM and the other is a Commodore, but they're all almost identical, but not quite. Same box though.
Yeah. Where are they from?
They're Commodore.
I don't know. Year. No.
I don't know. 70s.
In the 70s.
Well, my wife's Commodore one, I think it's back to like 1976 or 1975, somewhere in that range. It was programmable and was brown and kind of taller than it was skinny, and she kept that over the years. But it's funny, you know that Commodore started out making things like barbecues and filing cabinets.
Oh, I got a filing cabinet.
Yeah, you got a Commodore filing cabinet? I know a lot of people do, because they were big name in filing cabinets for a while. I mean, the only reason they got into computers, I guess, was because they thought, hey, there might be a market in it. And what do you know? They were right, except that their business obviously didn't know how to stay on top of what they had. Otherwise, I think they would have lasted longer.
Yeah. Yeah, it was sad to, as a Commodore exclusive dealer in the United States, we were one of the last holdouts. And we went through from the Commodore PET, we sold the VIX, then we sold the 64s and 128s. And then we got into, we did the business 8032s, of course, and all those. And since we were at the University of Illinois, we sold a lot of super pets, things like that. But then Commodore got into the PC clones. We sold those for a while, and then it just got to the point where we just did Commodore 64 games, and that was our last gasp at the distributorship with those. Anything 64.
It's funny.
For a few years.
I have a couple of devices that are much more recent that kind of keep the 64 going. One of them was a joystick that was built by, what was her name? But she showed up at one of the World of Commodores.
Jerry,
yeah. Jerry, what was her last name?
Ellsworth, I think.
Ellsworth, yeah.
Yes.
He built this joystick with a Commodore 64 built into it.
Like this?
And it would play, is that it?
I have one.
Yeah?
Somewhere.
Yeah, C64 on a joystick.
Oh,
But I also have another one that somebody bought me just, I think, more of as a joke or anything about a few years back. It's actually, it looks like a small, like a little tiny miniature Commodore 64, although you can't type on it. It's not, it's just a case, right? And it has HDMI, so you can hook it up to proper televisions now. And it will play, it'll play Commodore games and run Commodore software.
Yeah.
There's a number of these things seem to have come out.
Yeah, I've seen the some of the new pets, the Commodore pet. They make them over in England. I think it is, or something like that. I have to look it up. But they sell. They also sell adapters for your Commodore pet computer. I bought one of those. So I put all my pet software on the SSD and plugged it right into the back of it. It's pretty cool stuff. But they make PCs. I mean, a little Commodore PET computer that you can plug into a monitor and use it just like we did way back when.
Well, you can actually buy real PCs. They're not very powerful, but real PCs that are dongles you can plug into HDMI ports.
Yeah.
They're not very powerful because obviously if they were, they would generate a heck of a lot of heat.
Yeah.
x86 processors are not known for their efficiency.
No, that's true. Quite true.
But so you should be able to put a Commodore 64 basically in a USB key. Don't see why not.
You should be able to, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, I've done on a Raspberry Pi and then just plug that in.
Yeah. Well, you get a Raspberry Pi to imitate a Commodore?
Yeah, literally, you just install Vice and you have to compile it, but it works. Just there's instructions online on it.
I thought there was a bare metal version of the C64 on the Pi.
I think I had there was a number of C64 emulators that were written for Android. I don't know if they're still around, but I had one of them once, and it did actually work. You could run some simple basic stuff on it.
Yeah, right on my other screen on this PC here, I go to maskwork.at/pet, and it emulates a Commodore PET computer and I can load all my old PET programs right into this on the web browser. And that's how I play a lot of these games.
Given the simplicity of the 6502, like I mentioned earlier, that it's 3,500 transistors, right? You could emulate a 6502 in software, and on our computers these days, it would probably be even faster than a 6502 was.
Yeah, this one is a little faster. The emulate, like I said, put in a window. It has your chiclet keyboard underneath of it.
Yeah.
Steve Punter's favorite keyboard underneath of it. And it's crazy. You can load up files and play Commodore PET games. I mean, you can't. If you didn't look at everything else, it looks real. It's a lot of fun to play with.
If I saw Tindy
Take out my
had,
PC. I'm sorry.
no, I apologize for cutting you off. But I thought Tindy had a little pet project. So you can get, like you can build your own little Commodore Pets emulator. Can't remember the exact detail. I'd have to check. Let me check Tindy.com. Hang on, I'll be right back.
That's weird that you can actually emulate actual hardware.
Yeah.
Because the hardware was so simple. I know, because when I first had my Commodore PET, one of the things I was trying to write was a piece of software to emulate HP calculators. I think I managed to get it working fairly well, but I never did much with it. It was just an experiment to see if I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure there are hackers out there every day going, what can we emulate today?
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's funny, when you talk about what you can manage to do with hardware if you really try. You know that Windows has versions built for ARM processors for certain laptops that have ARM processors. So there's a build of Windows 11 that is for ARM. So somebody took that, made slight modifications to it, and built the appropriate drivers, and you can actually run Windows 11 on a smartphone, on an Android smartphone, in place of Android. You're actually running actual Windows 11 on the hardware.
Oh my gosh.
They even actually showed it. You can play some of the really complex video games. The frame rates are bad, sometimes, you know, like 5 to 10 frames per second, but it's really playing these complex video games on a copy of Windows 11 running on a phone.
Yeah, I tell you what's crazy as well. I found is the and the Bradleys would know this maybe, is there's a version on the iPhone. There's a software app that emulates a Commodore PET computer on the iPhone, and they converted like five games. Like Space Invaders was one of them. Remember Lode Runner?
Yeah.
On the Commodore PET at the time. I can actually play those Commodore PET games on my iPhone. That's crazy.
Hmm.
It looks just like it.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? But I've never been a really big game guy. You know, I never played a lot of games on my computers and stuff. I always had other things to do. But back in the Commodore, 64 days, my favorite game, the one I would play the most, was Dino Eggs. Dino Eggs, like DINO, like dinosaurs and eggs. It was one of those sort of, a Donkey Kong style run around a two-dimensional world, capturing dinosaur eggs and things. It ran particularly well on the Commodore 128, and we played, like Sylvia and I, we played that a lot compared to almost any other game, which was just fun.
Yeah, I remember playing Lode Runner for, oh my gosh, hours on end.
Yeah, but I think I learned very early on.
I gotta grab my iPhone.
Okay. I think I learned very early on that if you want to let your life be taken over by something, get hooked on games. So I tried not to. Otherwise, I just would spend all my time doing that. While we wait for the iPhone to show up.
Steve, did you end up writing anything in the Amiga days for the Amiga?
No, I never wrote for the Amiga. Never had an Amiga. It was really weird. It's just, that's something I never got into. I really should have, but I didn't.
Okay, just curious.
I remember hearing about how Amigas were used for the graphics on some television shows. Because back in the day, if you didn't have a big budget for graphics, the Amiga could do a really good job for you. I mean, obviously with real-time rendering or anything, but you have the software to work on some relatively impressive graphics.
Yep, that was the Amiga 3000, definitely.
Yeah, probably.
For a lot of video editing. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it had the hardware for it.
Exactly.
I believe it was called the Toaster.
Toaster. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the video toaster.
Video toaster, yes.
Well, hey, Steve, I was going to make a choice. I'm going to show it on the screen. It's called the Petsky Game Collection.
Yeah.
It's here on my iPhone. And it's just an app. I'll select, remember the screen here? See up here? Comes up with that. And I hit A to start it. That's right. It's got the same noise, the CV2 sound, all that. Then you can play you have, let's see, how many? There's Pet Galaga, Petsky Gold Runner, Lemmings, and Space Invaders. All of them are on this app for your iPhone. It's just crazy. I would have never thought I'd ever see that. It's called Games.
Oh, that's kind of neat. That's an interesting way to play those games.
How far we've gone back to come this far.
Yeah.
You think I could emulate an iPhone on my pet?
Probably not.
Apple would be all over you for that with their lawyers.
Does anybody remember an ad for the video toaster, a magazine ad? I remember it was, a picture of the toaster in the bottom. It said, we're not saying everybody needs a video toaster. For example, Paramecium have no use for them.
I remember the VHS tape they used to send out to everybody as the promo video. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, like I said, I wish I was into Amigas, but I never was. It was one of those things that seemed to skip by. I think I sort of moved from 64s to the PC relatively quickly, so that's probably around the time that it would have been the Amiga. I mean, yeah, PCs were not particularly powerful at the time if it was just an XT, but it did do some things remarkably well, and you could see that it was kind of the future where things were going, because Commodore wasn't really making a lot of progress at that time. And of course, they had their own PCs, so they kind of figured it was worth going in that direction. I think that's probably what the reason that PCs did well is that you could build clones, as they used to call them, of the IBM PC. You could have MS-DOS on them. And so basically anybody could build or sell a PC, and that caused the whole market to take off. And for better or for worse, that seems to be where we are today.
Yeah, quite true.
Steve, did you have trouble moving to the pad afterwards? Not the pad, I'm sorry, to a PC afterwards? Like programming assembler on Intel?
Well, I didn't really, by the time I moved to PCs, I wasn't doing assembler for it. I kind of moved into Quick Basic and Quick C as the development languages. I did do a little bit of, tiny little bit of assembly with MASM, but it was really kept to a bare minimum. Most of it was the higher level languages because they'd started to get quite good by then.
Right. Okay. Okay, cool.
I think as far as programming languages go, basically what really won me over, like as the way of the future, and I think pretty much anybody will agree with you now, is object-oriented programming. Once like C++ came out and I looked at what object-oriented programming was all about, I went, oh yeah, we're not doing flat programming anymore. I mean, yeah, for certain low-level stuff, things are still written in C or sometimes C++, but for anything high-level, nobody writes in the flat languages anymore. It's just too much trouble. How many go-tos can you have? What I thought was weird about object-oriented programming is that it emulates the way you think about the world. The idea of having objects representing things and other objects being derived from those objects. For example, an apple and an orange are both fruit. So you could have the base of those would be a fruit. And then the specific kind of fruit would be apple or orange, grape or whatever. And that's what object-oriented programming let you do in terms of the way you wrote your code. And I thought, nope, I'm going to do that from now on. But nowadays, that is, all languages are that way. Yeah, some people seem frozen on here. Or reversed. So, anybody got anything else they want to talk about?
Just a question. I'm curious if you remember the time frame on the PunterNet board that you ran, because I only caught the tail end of it. I was pretty young at the time, and I took over a node from somebody else that I ran. I'm guessing it was somewhere around 90, maybe 91.
Yeah, I know I quit the whole BBS scene in very late 1990s, probably 97, 98, somewhere around there. I kept it going for a long time, but I just eventually just decided it wasn't worth it anymore. But I told you, it started in 1981. That's when I built my very first BBS, my first phone answerer, and it ran right on through for at least a good 15 years.
Yeah, I think it was I'm guessing it was somewhere around 1990. I was probably about 14, 15 years old when I set it up and ran it. And I took over, I think it was node 7 from Barry Redwood.
Yeah. 7.
It was a fairly low number. I can't remember. I think it was 7.
I was trying to think. I thought I remember node 7, and I don't remember it being him. I'm sure I have records of this somewhere, but not off the top of my head. But yeah, one of the low numbers were definitely around here.
Yeah, I can't remember. He was the city limits out of Cambridge.
Oh yeah, yeah. I remember him.
Starship, it was in 80, it was early 82 when that one started.
Yeah, I guess that's when it really started getting going, because that, I think, is when relatively inexpensive modems became available. Everybody went, ooh, you know, we can hook our computers up to the phone and talk to other computers.
Yeah, I remember the 1200 baud modem was $99 at Kmart.
Wow, that's a good deal. I know when they came out at first, they were really expensive.
Oh, wow, yeah. His modem was a fortune.
Because, of course, they had to move to direct connect modems before they could move up to 1200 baud. You weren't doing that through a suction cup phone cradle. And I think phones have improved by then. But I think everybody wanted to have their computers connected. I think after a few years of, you know, having your computer isolated from everyone else, the idea of being able to transfer things to and from other computers became very attractive, because it broke you out of that your computer does just what your computer can do kind of mold that we had in the early days. It was great because we were so, you know, enthralled with what we might be able to do with all this power. But after a while, you began to realize that there were limited numbers of things you could do with an unconnected computer.
If you had 2 or more.
Yeah, if you had to connect a bunch of computers, then at least in the early days, from a communication standpoint, you could do more interesting things. And I think everybody would agree now that the internet allows us to do pretty much anything we want with our computers, because they're not limited to just our computers. It's like everybody's computer becomes part of what you can do.
Yeah, that was a new concept, Steve, when you did the BBS back then. When we had our, you know, each of us had our own BBS, but we were still connected type of thing. It was a good example with our 300 baud modems. I remember, if anybody remembers, a guy named John O'Hare, the programmer for Commodore. And many a night we spent, you know, transferring files back and forth on the 300 baud modem. It saved us a lot of time programming things.
Yeah.
And we learned very quickly that 2 of us working at the same time on the same program, we just copy it back and forth, make our changes and switch it back again. Little did we know that this was going to be a big deal later, huh?
Oh yeah. But the thing is, over time, things like that become less interesting on the surface because they become everyday. Like, for instance, we're sitting here looking at each other and talking to each other on a system that is too complex for any of us to understand every detail of what's going on here. We just accept that this is normal, right? That you can chat with people at long distance over a system that is not the telephone. We can have video, we can transfer files, We can do anything we want over these connections, and it's just it's an appliance, right?
Yeah.
And once things reach an appliance level, that's when they're not interesting anymore. Whoever sits there and looks at their toaster and marvels at what technology may be in it. It's a bunch of wires heating up and toasting your bread. But I'm sure back in the days when toasters were invented, that was a big thing, especially since they popped up on their own.
Nowadays, I have a doorbell that emails me,
Yeah.
a thermostat that emails me. It says his battery's low, and he won't shut up. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, you take it for granted once it's an appliance. That's that. It's an appliance. And you take it for granted, and you concentrate on whatever is novel and different that you couldn't do yesterday. But I guess when the Commodore PET came along and the home computers in general, we took a big step from what we used to be able to do to what we could possibly do now. I think that was the big deal. Just because somebody comes out with a new computer these days that has a more powerful graphics card or a faster processor or more memory, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make what we're doing any different. It makes it maybe a little better, but there's nothing to get excited about. So that first step was big, and every other step after that was incremental.
It's funny, Steve, that you mentioned that, because when I got my first PET, it was late '77, and it came in a big Commodore box, the whole thing. And the UPS driver brought it into my living room to drop it off because it was kind of heavy back then, 30, whatever weight it was. But he stood there at the door, and I said, I need to sign anything? He goes, no, you're okay. And I thought, well, okay, you're going to leave. Well, he says, that's a personal computer. And I said, yes, it is. He goes, can I see what it looks like? So that UPS driver stood there while I took the computer out of the box and plugged it in and turned it on. He looked at that and he goes, that's just crazy. He said, that's just crazy. That was my first experience with my first home computer.
Yeah, you can imagine to people who were just Joe Public, where computers, even for us, we were looking at our computers and going, well, we've had these for a year or two. We know what they do. They're great and exciting, but we know them. They're computers. But regular people would look at them and go, they're science fiction.
Yeah.
But these days, everybody has a smartphone, so everybody has a computer on them that's vastly more powerful than anything that we were working with, and takes it for granted.
Oh yeah. It's like, so after I unloaded took it out of the box and put it on the kitchen table, and the UPS guy watched it work. The next morning, Saturday morning, I got it from Nico, and the next morning I turned it on, and it wouldn't come on. I thought, oh my God, here it is. My wife sitting next to me going, we spent our whole vacation check on this piece of crap. What do we do? So I called up Nico. I opened it up and I looked inside, and I swear, I said, that's it? That's all there is to this thing? One PC board. Where's everything else? So I thought I got gypped.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of computer boards, you all know that the Commodore PET wasn't Commodore's first foray into computers.
Oh yeah,
it was the KIM-1. Yeah, a little board computer with a little, couple of 7-segment displays on it, and it was more for the tinkerer, the experimenter, who could type in instructions and have it actually execute something.
Yes, Strasman, he had a KIM-1.
Yeah.
Around with it. So I played chess on it. That was the only thing I did.
I presume it displayed its moves by telling you where to move the piece to.
Yeah, you just went by standard column.
Yeah, standard chess notation. Yeah. Well, I remember micro chess.
Oh yeah.
That was really the most amazing piece of software I had ever seen when it came out.
Its
ability to do complex computer things was far beyond anything that I had seen or worked on myself up to that point. Microchess was a just brilliant example of a computer doing stuff you couldn't understand directly. Like, you probably didn't even know how you would write a program to play chess, because you weren't very good at it, and so you really didn't understand what it was that the computer was doing to beat you. However, I did discover over time, with the help of my friend who was actually a good chess player, that it would be fooled by the same opening move and lose all the way up to level 7. And only at level 8 was it smart enough not to be fooled by that same opening move. So clearly it had its limitations.
Yeah, but if you get to level 8, you better have a lot of time on your hands.
Well, I couldn't play level 8. I was not that good at chess. My friend, however, was good at chess, and he could play level 8 and easily beat it. So, but it was still quite amazing because, having a computer game like that could beat me at a game I thought I was not bad at.
Yeah.
It's still pretty amazing. I think that was the most impressive piece of software out of the late 70s that I ever encountered.
That's true. That's true. It was kind of humbling to get beat by a computer.
Yeah. I mean, computer games on computers up to that point were just games where you played against something that was just randomly happening. It wasn't thinking. This was the first case of you actually thinking the computer was thinking.
Yeah.
Strategizing, doing stuff that it was beyond your ability to figure out, because if you could, you'd be better at chess.
Yeah, I recall. That's how I learned how to play bridge. It's personal software, bridge software. I never knew how to play bridge. So the computer taught me how to play bridge.
Actually, one of the first things I used to write for my calculators before I moved on to the PET were any kind of simple games that could be represented by the limited display of a calculator. I would go to bookstores and look through books on simple games and try to come up with ones that looked like they could be put on a computer. So a lot of my early tinkering with computers was doing that. Games like Reverse, or Reverse Eye, it's sometimes called.
Yeah.
Things like that. They look like they were just perfectly adapted to writing onto calculators because they could be displayed numerically or in a way that didn't require any kind of graphics or multiple lines of display. So I used to spend a lot of time on those. And once I got my Commodore PET, I started trying to write stuff that would do those on a computer.
Yeah.
Not you. Or have Siri answer you when you say something. There's a number of things that I say regularly that occasionally get Siri to go blunk. And if you go, not you, it goes, okay. Go away. So anyway, so that was sort of my early days with Commodore with calculators and programmable calculators and the early Commodore PETs. That's probably the most interesting part, because that was the early part. When the 64 came along, it was cool that it had much better graphics than a Commodore PET ever had. I kind of skipped over the VIC-20. I don't think I was ever really impressed with it.
Which one?
The VIC-20. I don't think I was ever really impressed with it.
I know I didn't care for it either. I thought it was like a stopgap for the Commodore 64.
Well, yeah, that's what it eventually turned out to be.
I mean, I sold a lot of VIC-20s at the retail store, but I knew it wasn't the screen characters in that sucked. I mean,
what is it? 22 characters wide? Like, you thought 40 column PETs were narrow, but 22 characters wide? That was just pushing their luck.
Yeah.
But you can see what they were shooting for. They were trying for something that was inexpensive, that they could really sell to the masses at a low price.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about, the original Commodore PET sold for $1,200. That was a mint. Average Joe did not buy $1,200 computers. But I forget what the VIC-20 sold for. I know it was really, really inexpensive.
Yeah, it was in the US. In the US, it was $299 when it first came out. I still got my dealer posters of it sold.
Well, even Commodore 64 sold for around that, didn't they? When they came out.
Commodore 64, when it originally came out, was I think $299 as well. By the time the 64s got to be a commodity, as you said, they were to $99 at Kmart.
Yeah.
I seem to remember a 64 monitor and a drive was $895.
With a drive, that's probably what was bumping the price up a lot.
Oh, I think they gave you. I think I think you got a desk with that too.
What desk?
It was a Commodore desk.
Yeah, maybe a used car.
But you know, the one thing that I really didn't like about Commodore 64s were their power supplies. I think we all remember that. Those power supplies were like suicidal right out of the box. I went through so many power supplies. And another weird thing about Commodore 64s, we had a bathroom fan which must have given off a fair bit of electrical impulse energy when it was turned off. Because if we ever turned that fan off, the Commodore 64 in the next room would always crash. And it wasn't just the one Commodore 64. Every Commodore 64 I ever had would literally lock up if we turned that fan off. So they weren't really reliable.
When I worked at Batteries Included, we used to put sandwiches on to heat them.
Yeah.
Well, that's the truth. That's the truth. I made at the retail store and distributing, we made a lot of money on those power supply, you know, the third-party ones. We sold a lot of those over the years for Commodore 64 people.
Well, eventually they came out with a new version of the power supply. It was kind of looked like the Commodore 128 power supply, but a bit smaller. That one was quite reliable.
Yeah, I forget which one it was. I know the first one was one we had a lot of trouble. We had a service department that, and it was they were Commodore trained the whole bit. And we always ran into those kinds of things. Well, can I tell Steve? Can I tell you a quick story about Commodore 64 computers when they started dropping in price?
Yeah.
Here in the States, what happened was that as they started dropping, they started selling more. In a retail store like Micropace was, we'd sell it for the full retail price because we'd have to make some money off of it so that we could support it, sell software for it, fix it if it needed to go bad. But Commodore went to the Kmart side and started selling them for like $1.99 a pop. And what was happening is that when Commodore was selling them at $1.99, selling Commodore 64s for $1.99 at Kmart, they were selling them to us for $2.10.
Oh,
so
I mean, buy them from Kmart.
Well, so what happened was I started buying my Commodore 64s and doing like Mr. Bradley said, we bundled. And so we bought them at Kmart. But then when they dropped even more for the Commodore 64, we ended up going to a little place, Montgomery Ward's used to be a department store in the United States. And there was a mail order in the Montgomery Ward store in Paxton, Illinois.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Somebody's echoing our audio, unless it's just this call now. It's really hard to hear you.
You mute yourself?
I muted my own to see whether it went away. Now it's gone away. Who muted? Somebody must have been. Okay, well, so continue then.
So we went to Paxton, Illinois. Paxton, Illinois is a city of 3,000 people, but they had a Montgomery Ward mail order house there. So I had a friend of mine, we went up there because I had found out that Montgomery Ward would sell you a Commodore 64 with a discount if you ordered it through their little outlet there in Paxton, Illinois. So I'd go in and buy Commodore 64s for like $30 cheaper than Kmart could sell them. And I started buying them by the dozens, literally by the dozens. And once I started doing that, other dealers around the country on Commodore discovered what we were doing. And so they contacted me and we literally sold thousands of Commodore 64s from that little mail order store at Montgomery Ward's in Paxton, Illinois. So much so that the guy that owned that Montgomery Ward's there got an award for the #1 electronic salesman of the year from Montgomery Ward's, all because we bought all our Commodore 64s from him. He got a discount, I got a discount. We made a lot of money off of that until they finally just petered out. You know, 64s eventually went away.
Yeah.
That's how we beat Commodore at their own game. They tried to put us out of business and wouldn't sell us. They kept saying, well, you need to buy 5,000 of them to get the Kmart price, which was not true. They wouldn't do it.
No.
Just went around them. Made a lot of good money off that.
I guess Kmart got bulk pricing because they could buy so many.
Yes.
But the same kind of power that Walmart has now.
Say zero.
Yeah, it would like to order 100,000 Commodore 64s. What can you give us to them for? Yeah, like the thing.
Yeah, to go, please.
Yeah.
Jim, I was just on the phone there for a while with Vicky Butterfield.
That's what I seen there. How is she doing?
Sounds well, and so is her daughter, and they're hanging in there. Vicky lives on her own now, and she's been staying away from COVID, and so is her daughter, and they seem to be okay. And she talked about, I suddenly can't remember then, Sid Bolton, and anyway, they seem to be doing all right. And of course, she remembers you and many people. She said we should not execute. And it's funny, your last thing about that store there, apparently when the pet was on sale, there was some store in New York City or somewhere around there that was selling more pets than anybody, and they wanted to go and see this great store and give them an award and everything. And of course there's not much there, and it's because they were selling them to Europe.
Yeah.
Because the European prices were so much higher, they were shipping everything. They had a hole in the wall store. It was this great elaborate thing. Really, they were just, usurping the Commodore price policies.
To England, of all places, where they were strong. It wasn't CompuMart. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was one of those places that used to also sell lots of cameras and stereo wheels.
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head. Crazy times.
I'm sure their weird retail stuff still exists.
Oh yeah. To make a living from Commodore, you sure have to.
Yeah. They're not trying to service apples.
Yeah, I stayed away from those apples and stuff. We did PC clones, Amigas, sold a lot of Amigas to the University of Illinois.
Well, when Apple started, they were a scrappy little company, and they made some interesting products, but they were just in the same boat as everyone else at that time. Yeah. Now that they're a $3 trillion company, they don't really care anymore.
No, not so much. Not so much.
Well, they went through their hard times, and they almost might have gone under, and then came the iPhone. But it's funny, you mentioned how much we paid for the pet back then, but to get an Apple or to get a TRS-80, you paid a whole lot more and got a whole lot less than a pet.
Yeah.
Remember, there was a fellow I knew. He got a TRS-80, the very first one. He was so pleased, and I said, ugh. And he paid, I think, pretty much more for the pet, but there was no expansion. But you could pay that again. You could pay that much again to get not anything that would actually expand it, but just a box that would then let you expand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good deal. Yes, sir. And then, of course, he wisened up and he went and bought an Apple. Yeah. Great. Oh, it's just like, oh. But we did have some good times. We'd go over to his place and play pool, and whoever lost had to go up and type the latest program in from the magazines. And then we would debug it all together.
It's funny, speaking of old computers, Sylvia has an early Apple clone of an Apple II. That was actually one of those where you built it yourself from parts.
I think it was a Peach or something like that.
No, I forget. No, they're not called a Peach, but it wasn't a real Apple. It was a clone. But she built it herself, like soldered the chips in and all that kind of thing, and it worked. She still got it somewhere around here. That's probably worth keeping. It's not a real Apple, but
well, the International Center, not when the World of Commodore was on, but when the big computer show was on, for a while there, like every fourth booth was some sort of Apple clone.
Yeah.
And because there wasn't anything unique to them.
No.
And so there were just bunches and bunches of them, all kinds of different brands. And basically, probably they just, quickly called up the company who was making the boards in China or wherever and said, can you sell us some others? Just send them on over. Because they were identical. There's a fellow I know, he does videos and things, and he talks about whether they're compatibles or clones or whatever various stages of things. But
your sound disappear, or is it just me?
my audio has gone.
Yeah, now you're back.
Oh, there I am.
I remember for a while there, Apple actually licensed their software.
Yeah.
Jobs left the company. They licensed their software to a few companies, I know, at one time. It stopped soon after, but they did a few.
Well, I'm sure the shareholders of Apple will not gripe too much about what Apple turned into. They certainly aren't the same company they started out as.
If I had bought $1,000 of Apple shares when I was 18 years old, it would now be worth $100 million.
Yeah, you'd be filthy rich. Well, it's like saying if you had a time machine, the first thing you do is you go back in time and buy stock in companies that nobody would think of buying stock in, like IBM or Apple or Google.
Or bought Bitcoin.
Yeah, don't buy any Commodore.
Not Commodore. I don't know. You know when to sell anyway.
Yes. Well, now, I may drop out a little bit. I'm on Starlink, so every once in a while you get a little on that, but it's pretty good. I'm rural. I don't have a decent internet connection through any of the service providers, so
you get what you can get,
and it is good.
Well, it's not been too bad.
Yeah, it's crazy on this. We were talking about 300 baud. Even we used to, my first use of a computer online was with 110 baud TTY. Now I'm sitting here I have an Xfinity. It's got 1.2 gigabyte or gigabit speed. It's just crazy. That's definitely faster than I can type.
Oh yeah.
I gotta go, but this has been fun. Let's do it again sometime.
The Bradley brothers, it's good to see you alive and well.
Definitely glad to see you both, you gentlemen.
Yeah. Hey, cancer's not going to take me out, not yet. It's already gone through me once.
Oh yeah.
So,
good for you.
I'm good. Anyway, no, it was fun, but I'm a caregiver. I gotta go and see how things are going here. So anyway, I put my email address in the chat, richardbradley@gmail.com, if anyone wants it. I'm always doing something. I'm retired now.
Yeah, I put my email in as well.
Because I'm old. Well, a little older than my brother anyway. Like 5 minutes.
Steve, it's good talking to you. I'm heading out. Maybe I'll see you again at a Commodore show.
Maybe. Bye for now, guys.
I don't know how to leave. Oh, there I go.
Take care, gang. Guys, I'm going to stop the YouTube feed at this moment, but I'll leave the Zoom room